To order. Welcome to meeting number 15 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is now sitting in hybrid format, meaning that members can participate either in person or by video conference. Witnesses must participate by video conference, and all members are counted for the purposes of quorum, regardless of the method they're participating by. Today's proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. A reminder that the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. For those participating virtually, members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor English or French. For speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic, something I forgot at the beginning of this meeting already today. So we'll always give you a reminder if needed. When you're done speaking, please put your mic on mute to minimize any interference. It's not done automatically. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair, and should members need to request the floor outside of their designated time for questions, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. If a member wishes to intervene on a point of order that has been raised by another member, you should use the raised hand function. This will signal to me that of your interest to speak. However, if you are there in person, please raise your hand and the clerk will inform me of the order. We'll try to keep a consolidated list, and I guess also a reminder that to speak slowly, especially to all the witnesses, please speak as slowly and clearly as possible, as interpretation services needs to be able to follow along, and that would be helpful. Everyone participating, it's mandatory to wear a headset with a boom mic. Please let me know if there's any difficulty with you having one right now. If you are on the precinct premises, we could probably arrange for you to get one. But let us know if there's any problems. And any technical issues arise, please try to contact the clerk or the chair as soon as possible via email or phone so that we can look after that technical difficulty and suspend if needed in the meantime so everyone can participate fully. Okay, with that being said, I think we can begin this meeting. We do have a 3-hour meeting planned for today, so just a reminder right at the onset that we have 2 panels of witnesses, and then we have consideration of the draft report in camera. And there was also a question raised last time during our report, and I will have a response to that question. So a ruling on that question, and that will be provided in the consideration of the draft report section, the 3rd hour of our meeting today. Okay, so let's begin with our amazing witnesses that have been to PROC before. We'll start with, we have Open Democracy Project, Sabrina Dellin, and from Civics we have Taylor Gunn, who's been before PROC before as well. So welcome to today's meeting. We can start with Ms. Dellin.
Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. This is actually my first time at PROC, so it's a real privilege. So the pandemic has re-engaged Canadians. During this extended emergency, 36% are now more confident in Canada's institutions. Trust in one another and the government has also gone up. This positivity during a tremendously difficult time indicates that Canadians can be asked to take on a challenge and should be given a more central role in designing the post-pandemic society. To do so, they will need more mechanisms to contribute. Strengthened community ties, clear messaging, and flexibility with election administration can make the difference. My name is Sabrina Dellin, and I'm the Open Democracy Fellow with the SFU Morris J. Wask Centre for Dialogue, Open Democracy Project, and Massey College. I'm here today on behalf of Democracy Exchange, which is Canada's annual democracy summit. The following recommendations have been informed by the Democracy Exchange community, current research about democratic engagement, and the understanding that the health and safety of Canadians exercising their right to vote is paramount to a strong democracy. This material has also been shaped by the fact that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on low-income and racialized communities, long-term care home residents, frontline workers, and incarcerated individuals. Across these categories, women are bearing the brunt of adverse outcomes. These groups are also most likely to face barriers to casting a ballot. I'd like to acknowledge the recent special report of the Chief Electoral Officer. It presents a range of measures to effectively administer an election during a pandemic. These include increasing the number of voting days, holding the election over a weekend, and preparing for a major increase in mail-in ballots. We enthusiastically support approaches that will provide a safe and efficient experience for voters. Now, our recommendations. First, work with a range of community-based organizations that focus on engaging voters over specific issues or demographic variables. The work of groups like Future Majority and Canadian Muslim Vote are of note here. These groups can help to prepare people for the experience of voting, from the process of obtaining and submitting a mail-in ballot, and can also help to manage expectations related to the counting process. These groups can also reinforce messaging related to physical distancing and other precautions. We know the pandemic has affected different groups in different ways. For instance, students may not be able to vote on campus, so they will require targeted outreach to clarify where to vote and how. Coordinating with community groups, nonprofits, and other entities will be key to disseminating crucial information about process and precaution to distinct populations. Throughout the pandemic, community organizers have demonstrated incredible ingenuity. Their knowledge and relationships are key to connecting people in a manner that makes voting relevant and appealing.
Point of order, Madam Chair, can I just interrupt real quick? Maybe the witness just needs to move the microphone boom up a little bit. There's a lot of popping, and I know that's difficult on our interpreters, but I find it's best if it's almost at your nose, but there's a lot of popping. Yeah.
How's that? Is that a little better? Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks. Yeah, there was a little bit, so I guess thank you for calling that out. Thanks.
So organizations like Apathy is Boring and the Democratic Engagement Exchange can serve as a bridge between innovative community groups and the electoral process. We understand that Elections Canada hires community relations officers for this outreach function. We advise that officers be hired well in advance of the WRIP period so outreach to stakeholders can be actioned quickly. We feel that this is foundational to ensuring engagement and would be worth making legislative adjustments to accommodate. Second, ensure key messages acknowledge realistic fears and emphasize that voting is easy and safe. It is critical to counter the American narrative that registering to vote and voting are onerous things to do. Research shows that first-time and frequent voters overestimate how difficult and time-consuming the voting process is. The fact is, for the vast majority of eligible voters, it is very easy. This needs to be conveyed clearly, along with the fact that there are different ways to vote to suit your needs and circumstances. Another point is to emphasize the identity of being a voter above the act of voting. Research has shown that this has a positive effect on engagement, and this can be built upon by calling or texting individuals to support the creation of a voting plan. Third, consider lowering the voting age from 18 to 16 and making voting part of the secondary school curriculum. This demographic is highly engaged in social issues, but feels disconnected from traditional forms of democratic engagement. As the pandemic will have a considerable impact on future generations, their input going forward should be harnessed. We are willing to partner to help support a safe, effective, and inclusive election should the committee see a role for us. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Taylor Gunn, please, 5 minutes.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for letting me be here today. Just a little pop check. I'm trying to pop. Is everybody's ears okay? Are the translators okay? Yeah, we're popping all over the place. That's great. If you could you refer to the email that was distributed by Justin this morning? It would be beneficial to you in this conversation if you could have it on screen. And while you dig it up, I might just say that I was walking to school today with a 5 and a 7-year-old and informed them that I would have the years of parliamentarians this morning and asked them what they might share. The 5-year-old was hoping that you could create a safe Canada, and the 7-year-old was hoping that you could do a price freeze on Pokemon cards to $1. If you've all got those screens up now, I think
I have a 7-year-old that collects Pokemon as well, and he would appreciate that. However, I never thought that was within my power. But now that you indicate that, I'm definitely going to try.
I've heard it's a global pandemic, so you never know what power you have in your hands right now. So I'm going to fly through these, and I've apologized in advance to the translators. But Civics is a national, nonpartisan, charitable organization working to develop the habits and skills of citizenship within students under the voting age. As is probably most relevant today, I'm going to really focus on our student vote program. And you'll see through the slides why I think that is relevant for our discussions. If you go to slide 2, you'll see that, and a quick background, student vote's a parallel election for students under the voting age that parallels with official election periods. We've conducted that now for 18 years, somewhere in the range of 50 levels of elections across Canada, municipal, provincial, territorial, and federal. And in the recent federal election, we had, I think it's fair to round, just under 10,000 schools register across Canada, and about 30 votes shy of 1.2 million student ballots cast. We use the currency of direct participation, not reach, because if I used reach, I could inform you with tallied media hits and all that stuff that we supposedly reached 350 million Canadians in the last election, of which there aren't. So let's go with direct participants. On the third slide, you'll see our geographic spread, and I point this out because it's interesting to note that if we include all provinces and territories, we were in 63% of all schools across Canada. If we exclude our lowest jurisdiction, and I can talk about that if someone is interested later, which is Quebec, our average would increase to 70% of all schools in the country. I believe that we are on par in matching or surpassing the number of schools that take place in the Terry Fox run across Canada, and I don't know if anyone else is in more schools. And that's fantastic for our democracy. If you look at the map, you'll just see a visual display of the lovely democratic pressure we're putting from the north on the United States. And then something that anyone who's into politics likes is the results of our federal election in 2019. Just interesting to note there the similarities in some of the turnout results and the differences at a national level. I'm happy to take questions on that. And then the next slide you'll see, which you might find very interesting, is how you fared in the student vote in 2019. So if we look at our the member of the committee with the most number of schools that were registered in their jurisdiction, and I don't know if he's here today, Mr. Lukuski had 47 schools register. Oh, actually, you know what? Sorry, that was Mr. Doherty, and I don't think he's here today either, and he's with 55 schools. You'll see in some of your jurisdictions, you'll have as many as just under 8,000 kids participate. On to the next slide, what you see here is the national voting trends of the student vote participants over the last number of years. And I put this out as valuable just because a lot of groups that are working on what you may call like youth civic engagement are generalized as being either on the center or on the left. What's interesting to point out here is that other than one election of the last 6 federal elections, the Conservative Party of Canada obtains the most student votes in the raw ballot count across the country. Just an interesting thing to point out there because we're a nonpartisan organization, and I don't like us to be generalized as a center or left or anywhere on the political spectrum. So if you were in our position and you could reach 1.2 million students under the voting age from nearly 10,000 schools across Canada in the last federal election, I think what you'd want to have an understanding of is what are you actually aiming for? Right. So there's a couple clues that have been given to us from previous reports put out by Elections Canada, at least in this case, 11 and 15 federal elections from the National Youth Survey. And what it did is it drew a picture of what a young voter, what characteristics a young voter has. And they have characteristics of being interested in the democratic or political process, being knowledgeable, thinking that voting and participating is a civic duty, talking with their family and friends, or being influenced by their family and friends, or having friends that could even influence them for political process. Ruby, I see your hand up, so I might as well try to respond there.
Oh, I was just saying that if you could wrap up.
What you also find for those that participate is they're more likely to have learned about democracy in school and also have participated in a parallel or a mock election. You'll see in the following slides that those characteristics of young voters, we cause those among our student participants during federal elections, and we presume the other levels of elections as well. And then very interesting, from the third evaluation that was conducted on Student Vote by Elections Canada, we found that 28% of parents reported that their students' participation in Student Vote positively impacted their decision to vote in the election. And then finally, just out of interest, because I hope we're all proud, or most of us are proud Canadians, we've now expanded this outside of Canada to Colombia, where in last year's municipal elections in 5 different regions, we had 76,000 kids participate. And I just put all this information out because I can then, that sort of sets the stage for what I could respond to questions that I hope can make us useful at today's appearance. Thanks, everybody, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn and Ms. Dillon, please. I think we can definitely, at least everyone here is a proud Canadian. I can bet on that. And thank you for your testimony today. We'll start with our 6-minute rounds with Ms. Vecchio first.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ruby. I want to really focus on civics. Thank you very much for coming here, Taylor. I really appreciate your goals and what you're trying to do within the communities and within our high schools. I'm a proud member of 5, and I remember my son coming home last year after the student vote, after they did it for the 2019 election at his high school, so I know it was done there as well. But I'm just wondering, what are some of the techniques that you use to get into the high schools? And is that the information that's received when it comes to the curriculum and things, who do you work with? Where does that get approved? And can you give me a little bit more background on that?
Sure, I can. I might, through some of these answers, also bring it back to some of the things that I think might be useful for the purpose of this committee. Probably a few things that are most relative to our success in growing our school numbers across Canada. Fixed election dates really help. Okay. I know that's not under the control of the committee, but that's very useful for us. Working in schools over the last 18 years and our level of service to educators is the best way to develop our credibility. I don't know, you might tweet this if you want to, but we've never actually gone and asked anyone for their permission. And we didn't do that on purpose because we were worried if we did in the early days that we might have someone say no. And so now what we do is we congratulate school boards and schools across the country for their participation. And we found that many boards or districts
Taylor, thanks very much.
are very happy with that.
I just kind of want to look, though, at the curriculum, because this is one thing that I'm very concerned with. I have been fortunate to work with our current member of Parliament, or our former member of Parliament, as well as myself. I'll be honest, I'm the only non-educator basically in my family. I'm related to a heck of a lot of them. But I'm just wondering, because I'm looking at the curriculum and I'm trying to figure out, because I have gone into schools where I just sit there and go, this is what you're teaching them. I know that there was one time, and more recently, where they were teaching that there was 308 members of Parliament. Well, we know that it hasn't been at that number for some time, and just small things like that. So I'm just looking at the curriculum specifically and what type of information the children are receiving and making sure that it's actually accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I can table that. You could also go to, I believe some of our most recent curriculums are posted on the studentvote.ca website. I don't believe we've ever had any criticisms about the accuracy of our curriculum. We remake that in concert with teachers in advance of every election. And in the case of federal elections, that is done with the cooperation and support of Elections Canada.
Excellent.
So I believe everything in our curriculum is factual.
Okay, so on the information information that's provided. So when students are making their choices on the votes, what are some of the mechanisms that you use to teach the children? What are the policies and platforms? What do you look at so that is part of the curriculum when you're sharing this?
So what we do is we provide a set of suggested activities and lessons where students can find, determine, and explore the policies and platforms on their own. What we don't do is teach the policies and platforms. We feel that's not as an nonpartisan organization, you can get yourself into some tricky water doing that, and that's one of the things we stood by for the last 18 years. Another big thing that we do, much more outwardly now than we did in the beginning, is attempt to facilitate conversations between students and their parents. And what we have found over the years is then parents can feel that they can have an influence on the development of their own children's political perspectives. So if I can table a document, and either you could go through it in detail, or I'd be happy to follow up in detail.
That would be awesome. I just think when we have their eyes and ears, that it's really important that they're getting the most accurate information as possible. What is your feeling? Because I know that some school boards have policies where they do not allow politicians to actually go to speak to classrooms. What are your feelings on that? Because that's something that I don't think anyone understands a parliamentarian's life until they actually are walking in those shoes, or perhaps maybe a family member. So I'm just wondering what kind of what do you share on that thought?
Absolutely. I think that, remember, I would like us to be friends and allies of school boards, so I'm not going to criticize anyone in the education system today. We're aware of that, and there are certain jurisdictions that are actually more strict or directive on not having politicians into schools than they have in the past. One of the things that we created a few years ago is a program called Rep Day. And what we try to do is help members of Parliament get into schools that are that we're aware of and have expressed interest to us, to meet and to have a discussion with their member of Parliament, the kids in those schools. What we found is this really interesting and kind of sad, but we're working on fixing that disconnect between teachers wanted parliamentarians to come into schools to explain their role firsthand, and even for their kids to ask difficult questions around current issues. You remember, our whole rationale here is that you're learning real issues in real time. I mean, hearing directly from a parliamentarian is exactly, and in school is the perfect place for this. There's some parliamentarians, and I think they're learning, that go in with a very partisan angle, and we try to suggest to them that might not get you invited back, and it may not be the way to approach something like this. But on the other side, what we found is that members of Parliament want to be in schools, but they're not getting the invitations from teachers.
Absolutely. Taylor, thanks very much. I know my time's up, but I just want to say thank you very much. I'm really fortunate where I live because, maybe it's because I'm related to them all, but I have had no difficulties, but I do know that many people have, and that's a concern. So thank you.
It's true.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to this conversation. I do get invited in, but I find it's the teachers that want us in, but the board has a lot of barriers and makes it quite difficult. So, and I can see from the numbers, me and Mr. Algabra being from the Peel region having the same board, we do have less schools participating, it seems, in the program. However, I did find that during election periods in the past, those students that had participated in your student vote program were really interested in the election process and couldn't wait to vote when they got older. So it's very motivating for them. Mr. Turnbull, 6 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. Really just want to say thank you for the work that you do. I think it's essential to a thriving democracy. And I really, really appreciate both your organizations and the incredible work that you're doing to engage both young, all types of voters. So Ms. Delhon, I hope I'm saying that right. I'm going to start with you, and I'm really going to try and focus the discussion on a pandemic election, which of course we hope doesn't actually become a reality, but is always a possibility in a minority setting. So, Ms. Delhon, I know your organization is doing incredible work, and you made some recommendations in your opening remarks, which I thought were quite good. I really appreciated the point you made at the very beginning about voters or members of the public being more engaged in designing the post-pandemic society. I really appreciate that point. In terms of community-based organizations like yourself, and you listed quite a few others, how can they help? So you listed a few ways in which they can help, but I guess, so maybe you could go a little bit more in depth there, but I'm more interested in a pandemic setting. How do we essentially coordinate with organizations like yourself, like Canadian Muslim Vote? I think you mentioned Apathy is Boring, which is a great organization as well. Can you tell us about what that would ideally look like in a pandemic setting? Because obviously that creates some challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. And the last name is pronounced Dellen, like Helen or Melon. No problem. What I would recommend is looking at how other regions, and as you know, I understand the committee is doing this for case studies. So I spoke with Elections BC in preparing for this meeting, and they noted that stakeholder outreach in preparing for the huge volume of mail-in ballots was a critical part of their pandemic election strategy. So fortunately, there's some case studies to draw key lessons from. Now, in terms of operationalizing this highly coordinated approach with community groups and nonprofits, I mentioned Apathy is Boring and the Democratic Engagement Exchange as bridge organizations. So, and Democracy Exchange, we are a coalition of different groups, academic, nonprofit, community. Toronto Public Library is part of our group as well. So we're all well positioned to help connect with these bridge organizations, and then also kind of help to raise or amplify the connection that's available through groups like libraries and community organizations in particular. So I just want to note that with Democracy Exchange, we held our 3rd annual summit in October. Normally we meet in person, but just like everybody else, we had to shift to an all virtual undertaking this year, of course, during a pandemic. And we had over 700 people participate in our 3-day virtual summit. And I don't think we could have imagined anybody doing that, a year ago, 8 months ago. So I understand your point about that coordination and connection piece being a really critical one and needing to operationalize that. But I want to just highlight the interest and, appetite for that democratic engagement, and to also highlight that among those 700 participants, we had people who just simply identified as citizens. So it wasn't necessarily people who do democracy for a living, but just, we were open to the general public. Among our registrants, we also had academics, community organizers, students, and members of the corporate, government, and nonprofit sectors. And so it's across those arenas that this outreach function needs to be mobilized. And, I mentioned the point about outreach officers are also available, but these nonprofit groups and community groups, such as Canadian Muslim Vote, for instance, have mobilized during the pandemic to support their communities in different ways. So that infrastructure is already in place to disseminate messages about how to effectively participate in a pandemic election. And again, to note that, we're happy to assist with that stakeholder planning piece too.
Great, yeah, and I noticed you mentioned the community relations officers, which do you think that more capacity is needed there in a pandemic context? Like, should the outreach efforts of Elections Canada be heightened or increased in terms of having maybe more community relations officers?
Yes, definitely. So during the pandemic, we've seen a huge shift to digital engagement, but we know that the digital divide is still a significant issue for voters in Canada. So having that, pandemic-proof way of having in-person type of engagement with social distancing, all the relevant precautions, that's still relevant. And I just want to highlight a piece of research from a few years ago that I did with public libraries. It found that when people have a legal problem and they receive some form of official documentation in the mail, they take it to their librarian because they don't quite know where to start, and they're looking for a local connection, someone in their community who can help point them to the right official channel. And also, it doesn't cost any money. So libraries are, physical spaces that aren't as accessible as they normally would be during a pandemic, but they're still highly relevant to, engaging communities in the way that we're talking about. So definitely worth the investment in those outreach officers to boost the digital engagement, but also that in-person outreach function as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Madam Chair, how much time do I have left?
Your time. You're just at time. Okay.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Monsieur Terrien.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to say hello to the witnesses who are here with us today. I'm very happy to see you. Ms. Dillon, I'm just going to read a little bit here in French, and I'd like to have more information on this. It says another important element is to put the focus on being a voter rather just on the act of voting. Could you possibly tell me the difference? What's the difference between acting as a voter and the act of actually voting? I'd like to know what your distinction is when I say those two things.
To expand on that. So identity is that inner sense, that sense of responsibility, that duty, and manifesting that and emphasizing that in the messaging around the election is key to boosting engagement. Going to vote is a thing you do, it's an action. And I think that should be significant as well. But psychologically, that sense of internalized duty, I must do this, it's my identity, I am a voter, is more compelling psychologically for individuals to act on than something on a list of, I got to go vote today. I can't explain the psychological part of that. I know there's some research there, and the paper that I cite in my statement is from the Mowat Center. And so, we can dig a little deeper on that. But it is significant, and that's the type of strategy that is very successful in the private sector for getting people to buy things, that you're selling a certain identity. So it's drawing on that.
Si je vous dis qu'être un...
If I were to say to you that to be a voter, that's a 4-year job, you have to be curious, and that is what people have to learn to do. They have to be made aware of the political surroundings that they live in. Is that what you mean?
I think it's about making the responsibility more immediate, and it's about making it more specific. It's specific to you. You are the voter, rather than voting being some kind of thing that needs to get done, something other people do. So it's really focusing on the individual act and then positioning it within this collective responsibility.
Je trouve ça vraiment...
Well, I find that most interesting. In 30 seconds, I'd like you to explain how we can do that, because I have a question for the other presenter.
Parallels to the pandemic. We have everybody wearing a mask for the most part. And, Canadians are, and voters are willing and able. We just need to engage them. At the top of my statement, I cited research from the Samara Center for Democracy, where they measured, attitudes in connection to public institutions and civic engagement at this time. And it's really high. The pandemic is giving us a really important opportunity. Canadians are ready to be engaged, and we just have to tell them what we need. They're ready to do it. So if we can get people wearing a mask during a pandemic, we can definitely harness this moment to get them to be more engaged as a citizen, as a voter.
Le parallèle est très intéressant.
It's a very interesting parallel that you just drew. Thank you very much. Now my question is for Mr. Gunn. I have 4 children. I have an 11-year-old son who is obviously very aware of politics for his age. And when he comes home from school, he talks about his teachers. I've talked to him a lot about what teachers do, but I think the problem is that if you're going to approach young people, you have to make sure that teachers can create a stimulating environment so that those young children, young students, are going to get interested in politics. What do you think of that?
I'll comment in relation to what we've done, rather than just like general commentary. So we agree with you, and what we one of the philosophies of our approach is that an engaged teacher can engage their students. So last year we had the capacity, which is rare, which means money, to gather and physically train, typically over an afternoon and an evening, and then a full day, somewhere in the range of 1,850 teachers through 17 different events across Canada. What we see in evidence there is an improvement to their ability and engagement to instruct the student vote program in their schools. And then also what they do is they seed the system with enthusiastic teachers. And just so that everyone knows, if we don't have representatives from all political parties as candidates, we then have representatives who are political pundits or commentators. And teachers generally find this fairly surprising. So we agree with you wholeheartedly. And the other thing that we would say is that, it's not just having this type of stuff in the curriculum. We know that in Ontario, we have a half course that's civics, and it is either very loved by students, rarely, or generally hated and written off as a bird course that you take in the summer. And the difference is who's teaching it and how they're teaching it. So I will never be able to underline enough the power, and not political power, but the power of engagement that teachers have, and how important they are for the health of our democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Mr. Blakey, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Dellon. I just want to start with you and go back to the comment you had made about on-campus voting. We've heard from some witnesses prior to this, there are still students living on campus. There are still professors and support staff who work on campus. I'm wondering, Will, you talked about some ways to kind of mitigate the situation of not having on-campus voting. Do you think it would be wise to continue to have on-campus voting in the event of a pandemic election?
Well, I would defer to public health officials on their best advice about whether elections should be conducted physically on a campus. It depends on how that can all be set up. And in my statement, I presented the student experience just as an example, as a case study, because there's lots of people right now that would be living in one location during this time, but they are now living somewhere else because of the pandemic. And so that creates some confusion around where to vote and how do you, indicate your official address. So that's something that would need to be ironed out. On the student side, I also just want to mention again, apathy is boring in the Democratic Engagement Exchange, because they recently conducted a student vote campaign that partnered with 700 different community organizations. And so that gives us a blueprint to make sure that, certain populations like students can have the messaging and receive the information they need to vote and, understand how to do it and where to go. I think because campuses don't have as much activity and busyness right now, they might be able to be used to have other people come and vote in those spaces as well. The pandemic is giving us an opportunity to think in really creative ways and try some new things. I know in the lead up to September with back to school, there was some exploration of classes being held in community centers that were otherwise closed, or using malls that, weren't being able to be open in the normal kind of way. So just to note that, campuses are huge. There's a lot of social distancing opportunity there. And so maybe, that's significant for this moment, and it can be an environment that can be harnessed to increase voter engagement for the student community, but also potentially beyond as well.
We've heard from a couple of witnesses that the the best way to avoid the risks to low turnout or disenfranchisement during a pandemic election is for parliamentarians to work to ensure that there isn't an election during the pandemic. I wonder if, starting with Ms. Dellon briefly and then over to Mr. Gunn, if either of you would like to add to the testimony on that question. I can take that as a no.
What do you think, Mr. Gunn? You know what? Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it doesn't really matter because it's not up to anyone here, right? And I think public health officials will play a role. And we've seen 3 elections over the last couple of months, and people still turned out. I think, as you saw with Mr. Boda, the estimated turnout only went down 2%. So maybe that's like a quick help you get out of having to make any iffy comments there, Sabrina. Mr. Blakey and anyone else, if I could get a chance at some point to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations of the CEO and how there could be some other things that could contribute to a successful pandemic election, I'd love to at some point.
I would love to hear that. I'm going to maybe leave it to colleagues from other parties with a little more time. I am interested to know, in terms of the student election, 2 things: how you think the pandemic would affect the rollout of a student election, and particularly because you had talked about the effect on participation of parents in the general election via your student election. How does a pandemic student election roll out, and what do you think that means for the salutary effect that you've traditionally had on voter turnout with parents?
Thanks. Ms. Sahota, how much time do I have for that?
You have a minute and a half.
Okay. So we just conducted parallel elections in 3 that took place, BC, Saskatchewan, and municipals in Nova Scotia. We missed New Brunswick because it was the first Friday in the return to school. So here's an interesting comparison. In British Columbia, which in the last federal election had over 200,000 kids participate, we had over 80% of all schools registered to participate. We had a smaller percentage of schools register. Remember, this was also a snap election, right? And then we ended up with just under 90,000 students participating. Interesting, in Saskatchewan, we had 24,000 students participate in the municipal elections, and that was higher than their previous our previous provincial election. Probably the biggest things for us that will impact our turnout is, does the election fall within the school year calendar? So there's some implications around that with the length of the campaign, things like this. And then beyond that, what is going on in the education system, which all of us from different parts of the country would realize is being affected by the pandemic differently.
The time is up, but Ms. Dellon seems to want to say something as well. If you want to take 10 seconds or so to chime in.
I just wanted to note a recent study from Elections Canada that indicated that voters would turn out, although they're highly concerned about the pandemic circumstances. The turnout is still there, and we know from other regions that mail-in ballots have been used with tremendous effect and with high engagement.
Thank you, Ms. Dellon. Next, we've got Mr. Tucker, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. Just want to get a little sense of the organizations that you guys represent. I have some experiences with the Civics vote program, and it's done very well, by the way. I like the packages that get sent out, but just top line, what's your budget? How many people are working with you? Have we seen an increase in the last 10 years in budget for your organization?
Sabrina, you want to go ahead, or?
Sure. So Democracy Exchange is co-founded by the Open Democracy Project and the Ryerson Leadership Lab. And the co-presenting partners with us are the Samara Center for Democracy, Simon Fraser University's Morris J. Wask Centre for Dialogue, Toronto Public Library, OCAD University, and Ryerson University's Faculty of Arts. This was our third annual summit that we held in October. Generally, we have our tickets available for around $149, or we have a special rate that's half that price as an early bird feature for students or for seniors or for lower waged individuals. This year, because of the pandemic, we shifted to a pay what you can model in the interest of keeping the conversation as accessible as possible. And the driving item for the program was how to strengthen democracy in the recovery from the pandemic. So we are definitely a lean organization, as most ones are, that are operating in the democracy sector, but we rely heavily on the networks of all the partners that I just noted. And also we were able to harness a really important moment for conversations about democracy this year, which is why we had a record turnout. Being virtual also meant that people from across the country could tune in ways that otherwise would have required travel.
You got enough time for me to respond to that as well?
Yep.
Okay. So just to explain what's a really relationship we're grateful for with Elections Canada. Last year, Elections Canada contributed around $2 million to the student vote program. Would put us somewhere in the range of under $2 per student. This is more than just the active voting. This is in some cases a month-long learning experience. Additional funds were raised to cover the cost of teacher training across Canada, other provincial elections, and our work in Columbia. Last year was a terrific year, somewhere in the range of 5.5 million. This year, I think, will be somewhere in the range of around 2. We're a project-to-project based organization, very entrepreneurial. And just to emphasize this, we don't receive funding, as in money to exist, from either Elections Canada or any election agencies or any government body. So it's a mix of individual donors, community foundations, on occasion election agencies, and different levels of government. And I will just also really emphasize what Sabrina said, which is worth putting out there, especially this committee. The groups of organizations in this space, which are few, you could count them on the fingers of both hands, and a couple of those are affiliated with universities. There is no pot of money for them to excel at their work. And I want to even, you can go back and figure out who said this, but a couple different speakers, some of them election officers, were asked about turnout. And what they say about turnout is, well, worrying about turnout isn't something that we want to be tasked with. We're comfortable being tasked with, are we making voting accessible? We're making the elections accessible. And that's great. But here's the problem with that. If election agencies aren't the ones tasked with worrying about voter turnout, nobody else has the capacity to concern themselves with that. I'm comfortable taking the massive risk if we have the capacity to focus on voter turnout. I imagine Sabrina's organizations and a few others would love to team up with us with that. But I worry that if we leave that in the hands of election agencies who are not taking on that responsibility, they won't be as creative, ambitious, as forward-looking, risk-taking as groups like us have been for the last number of years, but on nickels and dimes. It's just important to point out.
Sure. How much time do I have for a quick one?
You have like
yes or no
seconds.
question. Yes or no questions then, I guess. To both witnesses, have your organizations ever partnered with the We Charity? Yes or no? No.
No.
Let's see the floor.
Okay, thank you. Next, we've got Mr. Garrettson.
I'd like to ask if the Conservative parties ever did any work with the We Charity. I think that would be a good one to get an answer to. But in any event, Ms. Dellon, I have a question for you. You mentioned in your comments that in your introductory comments at the beginning there that you had concerns that we don't go down the same road as in the United States, where you have to register to vote, because it should be more open and accessible. Can you expand on that comment a little bit?
Yes, it wasn't a concern that we go down that road, but rather countering the dominant images that we saw during the American election of people in long lineups and news reports from American outlets about how long they were waiting in line, hours to get to vote, and the onerous process of registering to vote. It's very different in Canada.
Yeah.
There's also a very different history in Canada.
Yeah.
And so it's important to have our own distinct narrative because those images were just so rampant and are in our head. And we kind of, especially during the pandemic, between social media and news coverage, mix up stories about what's happening in the States and what's happening in Canada. So clearly bounding the narrative of the election here in Canada in a pandemic, should that happen, is very important. So to make sure that that messaging is very clear. It doesn't have to be an obvious countering to the American images, but we know that that's what's in minds right now.
One of the benefits that we have is that our elections are run by the federal government as opposed to individual states, which can make things messy. How important do you think it is that people are registered to vote by default?
You know what, it would be important for us to look at research about that and to examine, how that makes a difference. I don't have that research top of mind right now, but I understand that scholars like Samra Savi, that's someone who I've cited in my statement, she would have important insights to share, and she shared those actually at our Democracy Exchange Summit. I'm happy to put that together.
Do you think that it would be beneficial to allow individual, or do you think it'd be beneficial first of all, to in an effort to encourage people to be participating, to make sure that we've done everything we can to allow people to engage in the various different processes. So now our system is heavily based on showing up at a poll, either an advanced poll or on polling day to vote. Do you think that in particular, as we're studying an election in a pandemic, it's important to make sure that other and all avenues are available so that everybody can participate? Example, voting by mail?
Yes. And, to go back to the American election for a moment, although it was very arduous, we saw record turnout rates, and it was because of the easing of voter restrictions.
So one of the issues that we have in Canada is that our voting by mail, it's not very simple. Actually, a number of states, it's a lot simpler to vote by mail because by default, people are mailed out ballots in advance. Do you think that we should be changing the vote by mail process that we have to make it easier for people to be, for example, automatically registered to vote by mail, to have a simplified process that allows it to happen very easily, as opposed to the work that goes into it now? You have to do almost everything but provide DNA.
I think that all avenues that would ensure a safe and effective and easy voting experience should be explored. And the pandemic is giving us license to try things in different ways, and that should be harnessed.
Do you have any reason to be concerned that allowing voting by other methods, including vote by mail, would increase fraudulent activity?
I don't have any specific knowledge about that, but I would look at what happened in BC recently, because they used mail-in ballots for a few different elections in recent memory, one during the pandemic, and they saw high turnout. I think it was over 30% in their last election, and they didn't have any issues in terms of anything being fraudulent or any other kinds of concerns. They did focus a lot on clearly conveying the process to get a mail-in ballot, use it, and then submit it. And so they put a lot of energy into making that crystal clear. And then people were able to do it. So we shouldn't underestimate Canadians.
Are you suggesting that we should be doing that federally as well?
I think it's worth exploring. And there's lots of case studies to draw on and research available to see whether that is worth doing.
Thank you. Mr. Gunn, did you want to chime in there? I think you're trying to raise your hand.
10 seconds if you can, please. Oh,
you're on mute.
You're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Maybe you'll throw me in a couple seconds. What I wanted to comment on, because I'm watching the time fly by, is that, and I'm just going to put it out there because I don't know if we'll be given the time following this, but the recommendations of the CEO were framed around a lot of the weekend voting on how he could better access poll workers. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize, and even offer to you as a potential suggestion within your interim report is the ability for a group like Civics and Student Vote to potentially capture the interest of 16 and 17-year-olds across the country to assist in weekend voting. We have access to literally hundreds of thousands of students, and we've never been empowered to do so.
That's you can do that. I remember as a 16-year-old, I worked in a returning office.
That's all the time we have. Sorry. Next up, we've got Mr. Terrien, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gunn, I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about this point of having young students work. During the pandemic, we were talking about maybe having voting on weekends, and that would allow young people to work at polling stations. I'd like to hear more about that. I think it's an interesting notion, and it would teach them as well how democracy works.
Yeah, so it's one of the recommendations, or I guess what Elections Canada would like to see to make it to help them access voting stations. I don't think there's a big. I know Mr. Alagaba had some concerns initially about whether or not it should be on Monday or something like this. I think Canadians have no problem switching to Saturday and Sunday. Elections Canada is allowed to employ poll workers that are of 16 years of age on election day. And what I just wanted to offer is that what we can do as an organization can contribute to public education and engagement at a geographic level, and potentially in engaging younger poll workers to work on election day. I think in an unparalleled manner. You could look at Sabrina's organizations, similar in those community networks. One of the things I would just suggest in your interim reports, and our organization has definitely found those interim reports very useful in the past for us to continue our work, is the potential suggestion that Elections Canada is encouraged to look at groups such as Civics or the Student Vote program as ways to cultivate the poll workers that would be necessary on a potential weekend. The other thing is that for 16 and 17-year-olds, it's a good amount of money. They may feel less threatened by the pandemic, and it's great for our democracy if we have younger poll workers so that they could contribute, they could continue to be poll workers as they age.
I really find that a very interesting notion. Do I have time for another question, Madam Chair?
Second.
Okay.
Madam Delon, voting at age 16, are there other countries where there is voting at age 16?
Good question. Actually, I'm going to actually defer to Taylor on that because he probably knows more from the Columbia experience.
Go ahead, Mr. Gunn, quickly.
Just quickly, I would say that we should get into that as a whole separate meeting. There's so much to talk about that if there's, let's save that for a whole separate meeting.
Are there other jurisdictions? You could just say yes or no for now,
yes,
and then we could.
Yes, there are.
Okay, there we go. Mr. Blakey, would you like to take a minute and get a question in? We're at the end of our time pretty much, but I could allow it.
Thank you very much. I'll just, je pense que l'Écosse,
I think that in Scotland, they just lowered the voting age to 16. I may be wrong on this, says Mr. Blakey.
From our witnesses, if you have any quick thoughts or strong feelings about the idea of telephone voting, it's something that's come up in testimony here. We don't have any federal experience with it, but there is some experience in BC. So I'll go to Ms. Dellon first, and then Mr. Gunn, just as I say, for quick thoughts or strong feelings.
I understand that it was used effectively in BC, particularly for those who had to be in quarantine because of the pandemic, or those who were living in rural and remote communities, particularly First Nations communities. So it definitely should be considered.
Yes, Mr. Blakey, I would just suggest, and this is the attitude and behavior of election agencies across the country, to make voting as accessible as possible. And I'll also put in my understanding, and this also comes from the last few years, and this has come up in the debate around the Fair Elections Act, it seems that electoral fraud is I wouldn't say non-existent, but extremely limited. So that anything to look at how to make voting more accessible is worth looking into and potentially experimenting with. The only thing I would say is that I don't believe that we should begin to vote, and we're not ready for, because of its security, online voting. And nor do I think it'll increase people's motivation.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn and Ms. Dellen. That's the end of our time today. I really appreciate the interesting conversation, and I'm sure all of the members do as well. Perhaps because it seemed like there was quite a lot of interest, if the members feel like there's some follow-up questions that they may have, could we submit those in writing and maybe get responses?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So to all the members, if there's anything that you feel you want to ask, just please send it along to me, and we can try to get a response for our final report. Thank you so much. And we will switch into our second panel now.
Madam Chair, it's briefly, and we'll do very quick sound checks on our next two witnesses.
Okay. Well, we'll suspend for a couple of minutes.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Orb.
Side of their screen to ensure that they're in gallery view. With this view, you should be able to see all of the participants in your grid view. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Also, interpretation in this video conference will work very much likely in a regular committee setting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, French, or English. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. The use of headsets is strongly encouraged. Thank you for using those headsets. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses from Canada Post. We have Louise Shayer. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Shayer, that's good. Shayer.
Okay, Shayer. And then from the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, we have Mr. Raymond Orb, who is the president. Welcome to both of you. As mentioned, we're looking at the possibility of how to run a safe election within the context of this pandemic. And both of you have 5 minutes each for opening statements. So we will start with Ms. Shayer.
Okay. Thank you to the chair and to the committee members for inviting me to join you today. My name is Louise Shayer, and I'm the General Manager of Customer Experience at Canada Post. I'd like to start by outlining our long-standing commitment to delivering major mailings and the consultative approach that we take to ensure successful delivery. At Canada Post, we're proud to serve every corner of the country, and we understand the importance of connecting Canadians in the urban centres, the rural towns, remote communities, and the far north. We deliver on our mandate each day with large, sophisticated, and national network and a team of incredible people who are dedicated to serving Canadians. And when it comes to securely delivering large national and regional mailings, we have extensive experience. It means that we can support important public initiatives such as the census, national and provincial elections, and most recently, Health Canada's COVID-19 awareness efforts. In each instance, we work closely with officials at all levels to conduct extensive advanced planning. With a dedicated project team, we work with the shared goal of effectively and thoughtfully executing all the mailing requirements. We meet regularly with organizers to provide logistical support and advice, proactively monitor mailings from receipt to delivery, and develop mechanisms to quickly address any potential issues. And this approach has helped us to successfully support elections of all kinds for years while building great working relationships with election officials across the country. This year alone, we have supported provincial elections in New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, as well as numerous post-elections at the municipal, provincial, and federal level. After the federal election held last fall, we received a letter from Stéphane Perrault, the Chief Electoral Officer, and in it, he recognized Canada Post's efforts in delivering 4,300 monotainers of election material and thousands of special ballot bags to run the election, while at the same time ensuring 27 million voter information cards and 15.4 million federal election guides were distributed to Canadians in a timely manner. And during every writ period, we're also proud to deliver a surge of personal mail and direct mail from candidates who are looking to quickly and effectively get their messages into the hands of the voters. While there's often a surge of mail during any election period, I want to reassure the committee members that we are built to meet our responsibilities. With over 53,000 employees, Canada Post delivers close to 8 billion pieces of mail and parcels to 16.5 million addresses across the country every year. Our network consists of 21 processing plants and 477 letter carrier depots, serving more than 22,000 urban, rural, and mail service carrier routes. We have one of the largest fleets in Canada with over 13,000 vehicles. And while much of the attention has shifted recently to the number of parcels that we process and deliver, we are also built to process and deliver a lot of mail. Mail is processed on machines called multi-line optical character readers, or MLOCRs, as we call them, and they're dedicated to sorting mail, and they do so at a very high rate of speed. We currently operate 150 MLOCRs located in 15 mail processing plants across the country, which can each process on average 22,000 pieces of mail an hour. And as you can see, we are able to support large mailings, and we're proud to do so. I would like to close by saying that this year has been like no other. And with COVID-19, our top priority from the beginning has been to ensure that we are putting the safety of our people first. And to do so, we have closely followed the advice and guidance of the Public Health Agency of Canada throughout this period. We quickly and dramatically changed the way we work, the way we deliver, the way we operate our post offices, and the way we clean our facilities right across the country. We implemented physical distancing measures, and we ramped up the distribution of safety equipment and personal protective equipment to our people. Masks and face coverings are mandatory in all our facilities, including customers visiting the post office. And we've also implemented processes and contingencies to respond in the event of a positive or presumptive employee case. These are just a few of the many measures we've put in place to keep employees and the people that we serve safe. And throughout it all, we have worked closely with our unions and bargaining agents at the national and the local level. And by putting safety measures in place early and working regularly to improve them, we've been able to provide an essential service to Canadians throughout a very challenging year. In summary, we have a long and established history of serving Canadians and supporting our democracy when called upon. We're not just a delivery company, we're part of the national fabric, with a network built to serve all and a team of people proud to serve the many communities that they call home. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Orb, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ray Orb. I'm the president of SARM, and I was born and raised and live in a small community northeast of Regina with a population of 625 people. I'd like to thank the Standing Committee today. SARM represents all of the 296 rural municipalities in the province and has been the voice of rural municipal government for over 100 years. And today I'll share some perspectives with you. First, I'd like to say it would be essential to communicate the reasons why to justify a federal election is needed now during a pandemic. But to encourage rural voters to participate in a federal election during a pandemic, those in government must ensure the voting public understands why it has to happen now and why it is not better to wait until after a vaccine is available for COVID-19. Rural voters will be weighing the risks to their health and safety against the reason for a federal election when they are deciding whether to participate or not. Holding an election at the right time in the calendar year is also key to attracting rural-based voters to cast their ballots. Canadian agriculture is at the very heart of rural Canada and plays a significant role in our daily lives, from employing family and neighbors to feeding the globe. This means avoiding an election date that coincides with key agriculture activities such as seeding and harvest. It's imperative to ensure rural voter turnout. Farmers are not thinking about elections when they are taking off their year's income in a month-long period. In Saskatchewan, we just came through fall, municipal and provincial elections amidst the pandemic and recognized some trends we thought would be helpful to share. Municipal elections also took place in other provinces this fall, making them a good point of reference. Advanced voting for Saskatchewan's provincial election recognized historic increases. In 2016, over 110,000 people voted at advanced polls. This year, it increased to 185,000, 67%. Ensuring that opportunities for advanced polls are easily accessible and well promoted is imperative. Offering voters advanced polling stations in their immediate area with extended operating hours would likely prove beneficial to voter participation. In the New Brunswick municipal election, advanced polling was stretched over 3 days. This spread out the in-person voter population over the span of days, promoting these alternative methods of voting more widely well in advance of the election day, along with reminders of how using these alternative methods can help reduce potential exposures to COVID-19, and that would be encouraging. There's also an increase in the uptake of those mail-in ballots to vote in Saskatchewan's provincial election. A record 56,000 mail-in ballots were returned and counted this year. This is in comparison to a mere 4,000 mail-in ballots that were counted in 2016. Ensuring the method for distributing and receiving back mail-in ballots is fine-tuned, and promoting this mail-in options to voters well in advance of election day would also encourage participation. Consideration would also be given to allow adequate time for mail-in ballots to arrive and be counted prior to election day. Due to the time it takes for ballots to arrive via regular mail, it slowed the ability for election officials to be officially announced in some situation until days after the general election. To ensure the health and safety of voters, ensuring polling stations are equipped with adequate hand sanitizer masks, disposable pencils for marking ballots, proper barriers, easily identified marks on the floor or by signs to indicate proper social distancing, etc., is important. It would also be important to ensure these protective measures are well communicated in advance of election day and advance polls so voters know they can feel safe when they choose to cast their vote in person. In the Nova Scotia fall general elections, the province encouraged all municipalities to use telephone or internet voting. Some municipalities decided to use solely electronic voting, while others made use of a combination of both paper and electronic voting options. Those opting for in-person voting meant renting more polling stations, hiring more election staff, and spending more on adequate cleaning. And for voters concerned about attending a polling station in person, they allowed voters to cast a ballot via proxy. So in closing, on behalf of Saskatchewan rural municipalities and agriculture producers, we thank the Standing Committee for the opportunity to lend our voice to this important conversation. Look forward to continued dialogue as we all work together to protect interests and the health and safety of Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Orb. We appreciate both of your remarks. We'll start with our 6-minute rounds of questioning with Mr. McCauley.
Right.
Thanks very much. Thanks for allowing me to fill in today. I normally sit on the operations committee where we have a lot of dealings with Canada Post, so it's nice to see you, Ms. Chaillet. I wonder if you could give me some of Canada Post's experiences dealing with the BC and the Saskatchewan and the New Brunswick elections with the mail-in process.
Yes, certainly. Good question. So we did support, as you mentioned, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and the British Columbia election. On the New Brunswick side, a smaller scope, things were handled without any issues there in terms of the mail-in ballots there. Saskatchewan, a little bit of a larger scope there, and we were able to support that without any issues as well. And the BC as well, a larger population there, larger vote-in mail ballots for sure. Again, no issues in terms of return and getting the kits out, getting people to vote by mail, and getting those votes back in time for the elections.
Great. My colleague, Mr. Blakey, commented about fixed election versus, a snap election. Saskatchewan was more along fixed, but BC was a snap election. What would happen with Canada Post should something be called unexpected, perhaps in spring, as a lot of people are talking about? Is Canada Post ready to go, already ramped up for a much, much larger potential mail-in?
Sure. I mean, the election date remains unknown at this time, and we work very closely with Elections Canada in order to be prepared. So after the last federal election, which resulted in a minority government, there are certain things that we have to make sure are prepared with Elections Canada, the main thing being the equipment. So normally, if it was a majority government, our equipment, so our containerization equipment, would be returned to us. But when it's a minority government, that is something that they keep so that they can ensure that they are ready on their side. And then we work with them. So once a date is known and they communicate to us, we get ready. We have a plan that we use for all federal elections that has very concrete milestones. The deliverables are very clear. We have a memorandum of understanding already in place with Elections Canada. So we are certainly ready to support an election when one is called.
Any specific lessons learned perhaps from the BC or Saskatchewan election Canada Post hadn't thought of and perhaps would then think about for federal election?
The things went very well. We did get very good feedback from both elections officials in both of those provinces. No major issues that I'm aware of. We have very open communications with elections officials, and we do look forward to any feedback that they would have for us to learn from that. Both of those elections used a business reply mail, and both of those elections had a centralized return, meaning that the votes by mail were going to one location, which is not the case with the federal election. So those are some of the things that will be different with a federal election. But at this time, not aware of any major lessons learned, but we do continue to work closely with the elections officials.
Great. The issue of getting mail-in ballots to people, we hear stories, of course, of mail just getting dropped at the front door of an apartment. Is there concern about that? Is there any proof of such things, or is that just more anecdotal talk?
Every mode of delivery should be secure, whether that's a rural mailbox or whether that's a community mailbox or at the door delivery. Mail should be secured. There could be some isolated issues, and when those are brought to our attention, we certainly investigate. But overall, we do feel confident that the modes of delivery that we have in place are secure.
Operations Committee, I have to give points to Canada Post, the PPE and the safety provided to their members. At the time, I think it was 57,000 employees, but not a single case of internal transmission of COVID. Is that still the case?
We have had several cases. There are some isolated cases that were believed to be workplace transmission, very, very small in terms of number, and we have worked with the local health officials in those cases. The majority of the cases have been community transmission.
Wonderful. You've answered my questions. Thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Algabra.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. Thank you for being here. I also have questions for you, Ms. Chaillet, but before I ask my question, let me take a second to salute Canada Post and all of its employees at a time where we witnessed a lot of disruptions throughout our economy and our society. I have yet to hear of a massive complaint about interruptions in the delivery of mail or parcels. So congratulations to you and the entire team at Canada Post. And you know, I think the questions that we all have about mail-in ballots is not because we have questions about the capacity of Canada Post to deliver what is predicted to be in 4 to 5 million ballots, because we know that the capacity exists. We're just want to make sure that the process itself is secure, and that the coordination between you and Elections Canada is at optimal level. So, do you have any suggestions for us? What we should require or recommend to Elections Canada when it comes to relationship with Canada Post about coordination for mail-in ballots?
Yes, of course, and thank you very much for the kind words. Our people have been working very, very hard, so I will pass on your comments to them for sure, so thank you for that. Yes, when it comes to mail-in ballots, I don't think we have any concerns with the capacity. 5 million votes when we have, you know, mechanized equipment to deal with that, not an issue. The one piece then we continue to work daily with Elections Canada to work out some of the finer details. One of the things that we all have to kind of understand is the way that Canada Post is built. So we collect and we deliver mail. When we collect mail, that collection is based on, you know, over 200,000 induction points, which means, you know, every red mailbox, every post office, every Shoppers Drug Mart that may have a dealer in the back, all those are over 200,000 induction points within our system. And those induction points are cleared Monday to Friday, and they are cleared at different times of the day. And then we overlay on top of that our transportation network, which is built to deliver mail on a 2-day standard for local to local, a 3-day standard for regional, and a 4-day standard for national mail. So we have to understand what that would look like to the voter who has a ballot that they wish to cast. We need to understand what language we are talking about when we say mail by a certain date. So if we say mail by, you know, the close of the polls, does that mean that people will feel confident that they can drop off their ballot at 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the little red box by the corner of their street on their way home after work, when that box was perhaps cleared at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? So we have to understand what that means so that we can, Elections Canada can take that advice and understand how best to communicate that to the voters so that voters have a very clear understanding of when they need to deposit their votes so that they could be collected on time and delivered on time to the elections officials. And those are all the details that we are in constant communications with Elections Canada to understand and to work out. And those are things that we need to clarify over the coming weeks as we go through this.
Did I understand you correctly when you said that some of the provincial elections uses a different class of mail than the federal election? And can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, for sure. So the Saskatchewan and the British Columbia used what we call business reply mail. Because it was one centralized address that it was going to, that was a product that was easy to do that with. With the federal election, we are looking at 338 different addresses that these votes would be going to. So putting in place a BRM for all those 338s becomes very complicated and logistically very difficult to manage. So what they opted for was a postage paid envelope. And we are actually working with Elections Canada to make sure that we can test at least 200 envelopes from each of those 338 prior to make sure that we understand the mechanization of that, to make sure that there are no issues, how they will be printed, how they will affix the return address to it. We want to make sure that everything is good, and we will be testing those, and we're working with Elections Canada to test that so that we can have a very good acceptance rates on our mechanized equipment.
you're doing the testing before any election is declared. So just
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay. And another question: there is an idea of the ability of a voter once they mail in their ballot. If are we able, or is Canada Post able to track and inform the voter who dropped that mail-in ballot that that envelope was received by Elections Canada?
We are using regular letter mail, so there is no trackability of that particular piece in terms of within our system to say we've received this particular piece from this particular person. So we do not have that ability. We do have that ability on the parcels where you can track your item and you can see where it's going, but on letter mail, that's not a product that we have available at this time.
I guess maybe that should a question be directed to Elections Canada. If Elections Canada keeps a track of the envelope, I guess, is that doable? Where I should ask that question to Elections Canada, I guess, not you.
Yeah, that would be an Elections Canada question. I agree.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for that interaction. Next, we've got Mr. Therrien for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to say hello to both of our witnesses who provided very useful information. My first question is for Ms. Chaillet. You had the experiences in Saskatchewan and British Columbia. You were able to fulfill your mandates there. And I think that since that is the case, we think that you would be able to fulfill your mandate for a federal election. But obviously, federal election is more widespread. It's bigger than those provincial elections. What are the other problems that could arise that would make it more difficult for the federal election? Are there problems that are intrinsic to a federal election, or that could make your job more difficult?
In terms of problems, I wouldn't necessarily call them problems per se. There are challenges in delivering an election, challenges that we've been able to meet each and every time we deliver, whether it be a provincial election or a federal election. We've been very successful in delivering them. This particular election, we do have the added complexity of the increased vote by mail and understanding how that will work. And we are working closely with Elections Canada to iron out those fine details so that things go smoothly on that side. Other challenges this particular election could have is because we are in a COVID environment, how Elections Canada will identify and confirm the RO offices themselves and the polling stations themselves. I don't know if they will have more challenges in doing that or not, but we need that information in order to start our processes of delivering equipment to the RO offices, for the printers to start printing the VIC cards and the ballots and all that kind of stuff. All that information is required to coordinate that. So that would be, on Elections Canada's point of view, perhaps a challenge in meeting some of those requirements that then translate into us in terms of any delays. But we do have, we've been doing elections for a while. We do have a standard, agreement with them, a memorandum of understanding. We have some set milestones and some set objectives that we are geared towards, and we manage to those objectives.
Is
there a time during the year, apart from the holidays, of course, where you have more work and it could make that difficult for you to fulfill an election mandate at that time of the year? I'm not sure. Are there huge seasonal increases at some point in your work?
The peak season, which is what we are in right now, is certainly a high volume season for us. In 2021, something that we do need to take into account is it is a census year. So in May, we will have added volumes there related to the census. So that is something that we need to keep in mind as well. If they happen at the same time, it can be done. It will be certainly challenging for us, but not something that that we cannot overcome.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's exactly the type of situation that I had in mind. Now, I'm going to ask some questions from Mr. Orb, please. Mr. Orb, when you speak to your members or to the people that you represent, and you tell them, well, there might be elections at the federal level, what is their reaction? Do they think, well, that's not so bad? We've been through that in certain provinces, certain municipalities. It's not an issue. Do they think it'll be okay, or do they feel, well, it would be better not to have them? What is the feeling of people who've been through it?
Well, of course, we haven't, been through a federal election yet, but as I mentioned, we've been through municipal elections and provincial elections, and the mail-in ballots, I think, are the key to successful elections now, because people are concerned, of course, about COVID. One thing I want to mention, that our rural post offices are very important to us, especially at a time like this, and organizations like SARM a number of years ago lobbied to put a moratorium on rural post office closures. So we see them as a valuable asset, a way of being able to vote using mail-in ballots. Very important now.
So when you speak to people about possible elections, they are willing, people that you represent, they're willing, they think, yes, we could get it done. We don't see an issue necessarily. Do I get that right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think people are preparing. We're hearing a lot about a spring election, and I think our members would not be adverse to that. I don't think it would deter people from voting if they had the option, of mail-in ballots, and as I mentioned previously, the idea of having enough advance polls so there aren't as many people going to vote in person at one time. I think it could be doable.
Thank you, Mr. Orb. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this round. Mr. Blakey, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Orb, very glad to have you here. I was concerned to get you here just to get that perspective of rural communities that have already gone through an election. And in particular, I guess the question I wanted to ask you is that we've heard that, in order to procure a mail-in ballot with Elections Canada, that's largely an online process. So I just wonder if you have any concerns about that, and larger concerns about internet availability in rural and remote communities.
Yeah, of course, that is a concern. That would be one of our major concerns. Having to apply for them online, we don't have good connectivity out in a rural area. It's not reliable, and I think you're familiar with that story. And this is not only in rural Saskatchewan. This is in rural Canada, period, and something that we've been pushing the federal government on. That's for sure.
Ms. Chaillet, if Elections Canada were so disposed to call on Canada Post to ask if people could register in person at Canada Post outlets for mail-in ballots, and not to replace an online application, but as an alternative, is that a service you think Canada Post could deliver?
If Elections Canada approached us with such an option, we would certainly take a look at that and discuss it. We can certainly discuss it with Elections Canada and see how that would work.
And Mr. Orb, do you think if people were able to register in person at Canada Post outlets for a mail-in ballot, would that be something that would be helpful to people living in rural and remote communities who may not have adequate internet access in order to apply online for a mail-in ballot?
Yes, I think it would definitely help. We would be welcome to see that.
And so, is that a recommendation you would like to see this committee make?
You know what? I think it's something that would be a great idea. Yeah, I think we'd be supportive of that.
One of the other issues that I was hoping to get your feedback on, Mr. Orb, has to do with telephone voting. It's something that we don't have a lot of experience with federally, but we've heard some testimony about the use of telephone voting in British Columbia. And I was just wondering if you have some thoughts about what that would mean for people living in rural and remote communities if that were an option in a federal election.
Mm-hmm. I think it could be considered as an option for people that have landlines. I think it's something that would be a good option. However, for people that use cell phones, and there are many people that live in the rural areas that don't have landlines, they rely on cell phones. The coverage isn't as good, so it could be more of an issue. I'm not sure. It might be a security issue too. So, but I think it's good to have an option for sure, to have both of those.
Thank you very much. Are there other types of barriers that people living in rural and remote communities might face, or that they already face that might be exacerbated by an election during a pandemic that you'd care to highlight for the committee?
Well, for some people, of course, it could be travel. A lot of the seniors that live out in the rural have challenges that way. We don't have great bus service anymore. Between provincial and federal cutbacks, we've lost a lot of our bus lines. So it would mean that people would have to most likely hire someone to take them to the poll in some cases. That is a challenge.
So that's something that may have an adverse effect on turnout. Have you seen that at other levels, either provincial or municipal elections, where you've had reduced turnout due to those kinds of transportation challenges?
Well, we've seen that, and actually we just went through a bad experience in Saskatchewan with our municipal elections. We had a blizzard. A blizzard went through, and especially the west side of the province, and affected, even the Saskatoon area. And that was the worst thing that we've ever seen happen. It was almost a disaster. So we have to prepare for those things. So sometimes people aren't able to travel. They need to vote online or with mail-in ballots ahead of time.
One of the things that the Chief Elections Officer of Elections Canada has asked for in his interim report on pandemic elections is a wider power to be able to adapt the Elections Act to changing circumstances given the pandemic. So just to your, although it's not a health issue, but to your point about the blizzard, do you think it's advisable for Parliament to give some more latitude to the CEO in order to be able to accommodate changing circumstances during a pandemic election?
I think that's something that could be considered because, of course, these are different circumstances, things that we never thought would happen before are happening now.
One of the other issues that's come up, and although they're not in his formal recommendations, he's made representations to the committee, asking essentially that if an election is to happen during the pandemic, that the federal government institute the longest possible writ period in order to provide Elections Canada that extra time to try and overcome whatever challenges might come up. Is that something that you think would be useful to the folks that you represent in terms of allowing more time for the election period, so that Elections Canada has a little more time to get organized and around some of the challenges that may present themselves?
Yeah, I think that's something that could be considered. On the other hand, I know, from past experiences, a long writ period, and all the campaigning that goes with it seems to weigh on people. It seems to weigh on people's minds that live in the public too. They actually get tired of it, and you might have heard that before. But I think giving a little extra time is a good thing, but within a reasonable time frame.
As someone who was first elected in the federal election of 2015, I'm very familiar with the challenges of a long writ period.
Thank you. We've got Mr. Tucker next for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses. I got questions on the little bit on the processes at Canada Post, but first I'd like to start with Mr. Warbin. I'd like to thank him for the good work he does in representing rural Saskatchewan. Is there, to Mr. Warb, is there a common complaint, if there is a common complaint from rural Saskatchewan about Canada Post? I'm sure they've heard already, but what are some typical issues that rural Saskatchewan has with Canada Post?
Well, I think it would be in the timeliness, most likely. The things are delivered on time, and I know this year it seems like Canada Post is extremely busy because of a lot of the online shopping, and unfortunately, some of the small businesses have been closed down. And so, I think the timeliness would be the thing. It's not necessarily the cost, but the time it takes between the time people order things and the time it gets delivered.
That would spill over into an election where ballots getting out to rural Saskatchewan would be slower and probably slower to reply to Elections Canada with the completed ballot, which I think I would have concerns for Saskatchewan. Changing to the Canada Post and some of on the procedural side, I trust Canada Post. I think on the mail-in ballots, they're able to conduct themselves in a manner that Canada's should have confidence in the integrity of that vote. But just on the priority of elections material versus regular mail, is there a pecking order that would proceed the vote having more precedence over, say, commercial flyers?
I mean, all mail is important. All mail has its certain standards. All mail has its delivery windows. So letter mail would have priority. As we get closer to the deadline, if there are certain deadlines that we have to meet with Elections Canada, as we work out some of those details, we would make sure that those certainly become a priority. All mail is important, and if we deliver as we are set to deliver and as we are organized to deliver, we should be able to meet those standards. Letter mail is a lot different than parcels. They are managed and they are processed on different equipment. So even if we have some delays on the parcel side, does not necessarily mean that would translate into other mail. But all mail has its standards. All mail has its targets in terms of making sure that we deliver them on time, and that's what we will concentrate on. Letter mail will be letter mail. Flyers will be flyers to deliver on time as we try to commit to.
So there's no priority over the Best Buy flyer over the ballot in the federal election?
No. The flyers have their standard delivery dates, and we aim to deliver on time the different product lines as their product lines are meant to be.
Well, one of the concerns we heard from previous witnesses is some of the international mail. So if you can walk me through, what are the timelines? How much longer are the international delivery timelines? And the country that I would be thinking of would be Hong Kong. What would you know the typical mail timelines difference with letters coming from that country?
That's something I would have to take back and get back to you on. I don't have that at my disposal.
Okay. Speaking on the pandemic and what happens in worst case. So there's 21 processing points across Canada. Is that correct?
21 processing plants, yes.
So if a significant breakout of half a dozen COVID cases were reported at one of those processing plants on the eve of an election, what would happen?
Those are scenarios that we are going to be working out with Elections Canada to understand what those contingencies would be. We do have some cases that have been happening in our plants, and when those things happen, we do take all the necessary precautions to make sure that the employee is safe, the employee is supported. If there is any contact tracing, I mean, the health authorities are all engaged early on. We also involve the local joint health and safety committees in those decisions, and that often translates into us having to sanitize or clean either a part of the depot or a part of the plant or a larger segment of, which sometimes does mean that we have to shut down parts of a piece of our plant or a depot to be able to sanitize it properly before we bring employees back. And when that happens, we are quick to recover and understand what the priorities are based on where we're at with the mail, and we recover as quickly as we can. Those are scenarios that we need to map out with Elections Canada so that we all understand what the expectations are and all understand what the art of the possible is under those circumstances to deliver.
Just quickly on the testing that you were going to get done, when would that wrap up?
We're still waiting for the samples. So once we get the samples, then we would run them through quickly.
Thank you. Mr. Garrettson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Chaillet, am I saying that correct?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Are you confident that Canada Post could handle a significant increase in voting by mail?
Yes, I don't have any concerns about the volume of mail. We're talking about 5 million, mail-in ballots potentially. That's what's been estimated by Elections Canada.
And
We certainly. Go ahead.
If it was 10 million, would you still be confident?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. There's been some discussion about, and Mr. Blakey, I think, was asking you and Mr. Orb some questions about registering for mail-in. There are some states in the US, for example, that you don't even register. Just by default, you get a ballot sent to you in the mail. You're already sending out voter information cards, correct, to every elector. Is that correct?
Yes, those are produced by Elections Canada data, but those are produced, yes.
You handle the distribution of them.
Correct.
Would you be able to send out a ballot to every person that gets a voter card like that?
If Elections Canada asked for that, that is something that that we could do.
Mr. Orb, you were answering some questions about the reluctancy, or you were giving some comments about the reluctancy of people to want to go to a polling location, and rightfully so. And you emphasize that you believe a mail-in ballot could be something that would significantly assist in alleviating some of those concerns that people would have during a pandemic. That's correct? I summarized that correct? Yeah.
That's right.
Would it be even easier for somebody if the ballot just came to their mailbox on its own, and then they were responsible to complete it and to send it back? The registration process is another hurdle that has to be overcome. And Mr. Blakey had asked you about whether or not Canada Post locations would be a good place for people to register, and I believe you said yes. But that's still asking people to go and expose themselves when potentially they don't have to. What if the ballot was just by default mailed to everybody? Would that be easier for them to make the process even simpler?
Are you talking about delivering to homes?
Yeah, delivering the ballot straight into your mailbox or your community mailbox, wherever that is.
That would have to be done in a different manner, because right now we pick a lot of the rural people pick their mail up in the post office,
Right.
or there'd be an assembly outside somewhere, but not home to home.
Right, but they do pick it up at their regular mail location. And then they could. I guess what I'm getting at is, do you think that the registration process of the mail-in ballot is an added step that makes it a little bit more difficult for people to vote by mail, or do you think if the ballot just by default came to somebody on its own, that would be even easier for them?
You know what? I'd have to think about that. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on that process. This is something new for us to consider.
And Mrs. Chaillet, are all 100% Canada Post outlets open right now on regular functioning hours?
No, we do still have some that are closed, and it fluctuates from time to time depending on what's going on there, but that does happen.
So some of the outlets that Mr. Orb is referring to in rural parts of Canada might at least if you needed to go to one of these places to register, there might not be somebody working at one of those right now because of the pandemic. That's correct?
It could be the case that, again, smaller numbers as things are a little bit better, but it can fluctuate, and it is a possibility.
Okay. That's all I had, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Monsieur Therrien.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions for Mr. Orb. You were talking about advanced voting, which increased dramatically, as we saw. Now, in my writing in 2019, I saw that there was a huge influx of people when it came time to vote through advanced voting. So, if this new pandemic reality happened in my writing, it would be cataclysmic, and we would have a lot of problems with public health officials because people coming in to vote, of course, in person would be all amassed together. So if there were more days for advanced voting, for advanced polls, so that's what happened in Saskatchewan. More days, more hours, so that alleviates the pressures.
That was the case, and that does help because, of course, it reduces the concentration of as many people on the
Okay, seems like there's some connectivity problems. Mr. Orb, can you try again?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, the idea of having more days of advanced polls and extended hours is a good thing, and it can be helpful because it does reduce the number of people in a polling station at one time. Yes.
And you did not have any issues with the fact that many people went to vote at the same time? So by extending hours and adding more days, there was never a dangerous amount of people from a public health perspective. Is that correct?
I could only speak from the rural perspective in that sense, because we don't have as many people in the rural area. The population isn't as high, and so there wouldn't be that many people voting.
Right. OK. Mais je vous remercie.
All right. Thank you, sir. And regarding, and for Madame Chaillet, will it be a problem if you have to distribute all this mail all across Canada because there are very remote regions? Will this be a huge challenge to overcome? And of course, respecting the timelines, you will have a very short time frame in order to do that.
And the question, was it around the timelines of the mail? I'm sorry.
Non, c'est que.
No, that's fine. So Canada is a huge country, vast territory. So being able to send mail all across the country when you have very short timelines, is this a challenge for you?
We deliver across this vast country every day, billions of pieces of mail every year. Yes, there are some challenges for sure. Things like seasonality, things like storms, things that we have to react to almost every day as we put mail through. We do have contingencies that are built, and we do our best to deliver everything that we can on time. And when there are exceptions, we bring in the contingencies to do the best that we can to recover.
Thank you. Mr. Blakey, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Chaillet. When we heard from the CEO of Elections Canada, he said he was very confident in Canada Post's ability to deliver the mail when it comes to mail-in ballots. He had said that the challenge of increased volume would be more so on the logistical side for Elections Canada in terms of sorting those and making sure that they end up in the right place to be counted. I'm wondering, in the situation where somebody applies for their mail-in ballot, they receive their mail-in ballot, they have a prepaid envelope that they're going to use in order to send their ballot in. Do you envision that going to an Elections Canada headquarters and then being mailed to local returning offices, or is that something that based on the postal code of the sender can be sorted and then sent directly through local mail to local returning offices across the country? Do you have a sense of how the logistics of that mail-in ballot would work and Canada Post's role in that? Whether it's delivering to a centralized location, having Elections Canada do the sorting and then mailing again, or whether Canada Post would be involved in sorting in a more kind of direct and immediate way, and then having Canada Post just deliver locally to the local returning office.
Mm-hmm. So the logistics in terms of our discussions with Elections Canada to date would entail that people would request a mail-in ballot That mail-in ballot would be fulfilled by the local RO. So 338 of them would fulfill that order for the mail-in ballot, and that return envelope would be back to the returning officer. So the returning office does go to the returning. There are some other votes that will be centralized to go to Ottawa, things like the internationals and things like that. But by and large, the local vote will be held locally and will be returned locally. And that's why it's important for us to test all of the envelopes that will be pre-produced to make sure that how they will be printed and how they will affix the return address is important for us to make sure that everything is done properly so that we can have a high mechanized rate on our equipment and making sure that we return things on time. So that's part of the testing that we're doing with all 338 because they will be held locally and returned locally.
So then are those envelopes printed at the local returning office, or does Canada Post play a role at all in preparing those envelopes and the address on them, or is that happening at each local returning office?
I'd have to confirm where they are actually being printed. I don't have those details for me. I'd be glad to get back to you on those in terms of the logistics of the printing of them.
Thank you. And
that's all the time for this interaction. Mr. Lukiski, would you like a couple of minutes?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I know time is tight, but I should probably initially say in the spirit of full transparency that I've known Ray Orb for well over 30 years. And even though that he has been completely professional and nonpartisan in all of our dealings, I have also worked extensively on a political or two campaign with his wife. So just so that's out on the table. But Ray, it's good to see you again. I have one quick question for you and then one for Canada Post, should we have enough time. Ray, you've talked about the challenges of elections during certain times of the year, calendar year, for rural Canadians and rural Saskatchewanians. We've heard a lot of talk over the course of the last few weeks about the possibility of a spring election. Of course, spring in Saskatchewan means seeding. What do you think would occur in terms of voter turnout if an election was called in the middle of seeding in Saskatchewan?
Well, thanks for the question. I don't think the turnout would be as good. However, the use of mail-in ballots, I think, is something that would alleviate some of that. If you're a farmer, the spring and the fall are the times when you don't want elections, and any other time of the year, I think is suitable.
Thanks very much. And quickly then to Madame Cherier, could you give me an approximate timeline for the return delivery by mail? And what I'm getting at here is the Elections Canada folks have told us that in all probability for the 5 million or so ballots that might be mailed in if there was an election held in a pandemic, there would have to be a deadline for Elections Canada to receive them. And the talk has been the Monday, if there is a Monday election date, a 5 p.m. delivery deadline for mail-in ballots to be returned. How long does it normally take if a ballot is put in the mail for it to be received? And what advice would you give to Elections Canada about advising or putting a deadline on for Canadians to put the ballots in the mail?
Okay, thank you for that question. And that's something that we continue to work with Elections Canada on. For the local to local, we are looking at 2 days. So that is our standard our service standard around the local. So 2 days, we should be able to turn that around, no problem. The issue that we do have is how voters will be informed in terms of the deadline to drop it into the box. And as I mentioned earlier, our collection system is based on a Monday to Friday pickup. And it's based on different hours. So not every little red box gets picked up at 5 o'clock. Some might be 11 in the morning, some might be 2 in the afternoon. So making sure that voters are well informed of when they should be putting that ballot in a mailbox to make sure that it gets to where it needs to get to will be key to make sure that the ballots get to where they need to go. So as an example, if somebody puts something in a box, like I mentioned, at 5 o'clock on a Friday, and that box got cleared at 3, it's not going to be picked up on the Friday. It's going to be picked up on the Monday, and it will not be delivered on time to the regional office, the RO office on the Monday. So those are things, and those are scenarios that we're working through Elections Canada so that they understand how things work and can take that information under advice in terms of how they could take that information to make sure that voters are well informed and make those decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Those were very important questions, and I'm glad we got them in. Thanks to the witnesses, Ms. Cheye, Mr. Orr, you've been incredible. Thank you so much for coming out today and spending time with us. To the rest of the committee members, we are going to suspend the meeting for a little while so that we can all go into in-camera mode. So you have a separate link that was emailed to you for that, and a separate password that was emailed as well. And so the email for the link was in the original, the first with the links, and then the password emails, both passwords were in there. So I hope that everyone has that information. Do I see nodding heads? You all have that? Okay, perfect. All right, so then we will log out of this meeting, and I will see you in camera in a few minutes. Thank you.